Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
Picture this moment when my younger sister Sarah's wedding became the swirling center of our family's universe. An extravagant affair budgeted at $750,000 that featured sprawling estates in the Connecticut countryside adorned with crystal chandeliers and meticulously curated guest lists stretching far beyond our modest Ohio roots. Yet in the midst of all that glittering anticipation, my own name vanished entirely from the invitations, leaving me to discover the snub. Through sidelong conversations and pointed silences that cut deeper than any direct confrontation ever could. As the save-the-dates arrived in elegant envelopes for everyone from distant cousins to high school acquaintances, I found myself scrolling through the family group chat on my phone in the dim light of my Chicago apartment. The screen illuminating faces flushed with excitement over teaser photos of venues that screamed inherited wealth we never truly possessed, while a familiar ache settled in my chest, not just from the exclusion, but from the way it echoed years of being positioned as the unruly outlier in a household that prized conformity above all else. Mom, Linda, with her impeccable bob haircut and her unyielding grip on social appearances, had always favored Sarah's poised demeanor and predictable path, the marketing job in New York, the engagement to Tom that unfolded like a scripted romance, over my freelance graphic design career that involved late nights sketching unconventional ideas and occasionally challenging the status quo in ways that made family gatherings tense. So when she finally addressed the issue during one of our strained weekly phone calls, her voice carried that practiced blend of concern and dismissal, explaining that Sarah's vision demanded unblemished elegance without any potential disruptions, implying that my mere presence might unravel the carefully woven fairy tale into something resembling the chaotic reality I supposedly embodied. I listened to her words filter through the line, each one laced with the subtext of past incidents like the time in high school when I organized a protest against the school's dress code, or more recently when I voiced opinions at Thanksgiving that veered too far from the conservative script our relatives preferred. And instead of erupting in anger, I mustered a response that sounded composed, assuring her that I completely understood the delicate balance they aimed to maintain, all while inwardly forging the outlines of a response that would demonstrate just how profoundly they underestimated the resilience and ingenuity I had cultivated over 45 years of navigating their preferences. The days following that conversation blurred into a pattern of deliberate detachment, where I immersed myself in client projects involving vibrant logos for local businesses that allowed me to channel the brewing frustration into creative outlets. Yet every notification from social media pulled me back into the orbit of Sarah's preparations, with posts showcasing her bridal fittings and venue walkthroughs that amassed likes and comments from a community I once shared, now seemingly aligned against me in their collective enthusiasm. My brother Mark, ever the neutral mediator with a steady job as an accountant in Cleveland, reached out casually to share his invitation's arrival, the embossed gold lettering catching the light in his photo, and when I probed gently about my own status, he hesitated before admitting that perhaps Mom had handled it differently for me, a vague assurance that only heightened the sting of being sidelined in what should have been a shared family milestone. As the rehearsal dinner approached, whispers in the group chat confirmed the guest list's finality, my absence noted in passing as if it were a minor oversight rather than a calculated omission. And that realization ignited the spark for my initial act of reclamation, a subtle intrusion designed not to demolish, but to remind them of the threads connecting us all, beginning with my unannounced appearance at the estate where string quartets tuned their instruments under strings of fairy lights that twinkled against the evening sky. Dressed in a sleek black sheath that accentuated my figure without overt ostentation, I approached the gated entrance with a wrapped package in hand, a custom caricature I had illustrated myself depicting Sarah and Tom in exaggerated bridal attire, her gown billowing comically around a pedestal of perfection while his bow tie loomed absurdly large, capturing the humor in their relentless pursuit of flawlessness in a way that poked gently at the artifice without malice. The event planner eyed me suspiciously at the perimeter, her clipboard clutched like a shield, but I offered a disarming smile and mentioned my familial ties, slipping past into the manicured lawns where guests mingled with champagne flutes, the air rich with the scent of fresh blooms and whispered speculations about the couple's future. Sarah noticed me almost immediately, her expression shifting from radiant poise to a fleeting pallor beneath the warm glow of the lanterns, and Mom materialized swiftly at her side, her arm linking possessively as she advanced with a murmur about this being precisely the sort of unforeseen complication she had anticipated, yet I pressed forward undeterred, extending the gift with a light-hearted comment on celebrating from the sidelines since official channels seemed closed. The group gathered tentatively as they unwrapped the drawing, nervous laughter bubbling up from some quarters while Tom let out a genuine guffaw that eased the tension momentarily, Sarah's forced grin revealing the cracks in her composure, and in that brief exchange, I sensed the equilibrium tilting ever so slightly, my presence asserting a narrative they could no longer ignore without consequence. As I prepared to depart, catching the weight of Mom's disapproving stare that hinted at retaliatory measures in the offing, a fragment of conversation drifted from Sarah to her maid of honor, something about ensuring my permanent exclusion this time around due to the lingering fallout from Dad's indiscretions years ago. A phrase that halted me mid-stride and planted seeds of deeper intrigue, compelling me to wonder what buried elements from our shared history truly fueled this divide, and how they might reshape the path ahead. That fleeting snippet of conversation I overheard at the rehearsal lingered in my mind like an unresolved chord from the quartet's melody, weaving itself into every quiet moment of the ensuing days as I returned to my Chicago routine, where the hum of the city provided a stark contrast to the polished rural elegance of Sarah's preparations, prompting me to question whether the exclusion stemmed from mere surface-level quirks or from roots entangled in the murky undercurrents of our family's unspoken history that Dad's passing had never fully clarified despite the decade that followed his unexpected heart attack. Immersed once more in my freelance world, I channeled the unease into refining digital illustrations for a client's branding project, the intricate patterns on my screen mirroring the tangled thoughts about how Mom had always positioned Sarah as the golden child, her achievements in the corporate ladder of New York celebrated with lavish praise while my independent ventures elicited only tepid nods, a dynamic that now amplified the sting of being sidelined from what promised to be the pinnacle of their shared aspirations. Social media continued its relentless assault, flooding my feeds with updates from the bridal shower that unfolded in a sun-drenched Hamptons rental complete with cascading champagne towers and gowns that evoked the pages of bridal magazines we used to pore over as kids, each post a reminder of the parallel universe where I existed only in the periphery, prompting Mom's periodic check and calls that blended superficial wedding logistics with subtle barbs about maintaining distance to preserve the event's sanctity, her tone implying that my absence was a necessary sacrifice for the greater harmony she envisioned. I responded with measured politeness, inquiring about the details of the floral arrangements or the menu selections while inwardly sketching the contours of a retaliation that would inject just enough unpredictability to underscore the fragility of their meticulously planned perfection without descending into outright destruction. Settling on a maneuver involving the online RSVP system that Sarah had proudly shared in the family thread as a modern touch for managing the influx of confirmations from their extensive network. Late one evening, with the city lights flickering beyond my window like distant stars, I crafted a fictitious entry under the guise of a forgotten cousin's profile, altering the details to include an additional guest who required elaborate accommodations, such as vegan options laced with obscure allergies, and a seating preference that clashed with the venue's layout. The act feeling like a harmless prank akin to the sibling pranks we exchanged in our youth, but now laced with the weight of adult grievances that made my pulse quicken as I submitted the changes from the anonymity of my laptop. The repercussions surfaced swiftly the following morning, manifesting in a flurry of messages across the group chat where confusion reigned over the sudden discrepancies in the guest tally, with the caterers reportedly scrambling to adjust orders and the event coordinator firing off emails about potential overages in the budget that already strained at $750,000. A development that elicited a mix of amusement and mild alarm from Mark, who texted me privately about the phantom attendee throwing wrenches into the works, his light-hearted recounting of Sarah's frustration providing the first genuine chuckle I'd managed since the snub. The true escalation arrived during the informal pre-wedding brunch that Mom hosted at her Ohio home, an event ostensibly for close family, but extended through back channels to include Sarah's inner circle, and though my invitation had never materialized, a mutual acquaintance let slip the details during a casual coffee run, compelling me to embark on the 3-hour drive with a bottle of inexpensive yet bubbly Prosecco in tow as a prop for my impromptu arrival, the road unwinding beneath tires that carried me toward a confrontation I both dreaded and anticipated. Pulling up to the familiar driveway lined with autumn leaves crunching underfoot, I stepped inside to the aroma of fresh pastries and the murmur of conversations centered on the upcoming nuptials. Sarah's eyes widening in disbelief from her perch at the head of the table clad in a luxurious robe that spoke of spa mornings and unhurried luxury, while Mom's approach was swift and laced with that familiar undercurrent of exasperation as she questioned my unannounced presence with a whisper that bordered on accusatory. Undaunted, I integrated myself into the gathering by distributing mimosas poured from my contribution and engaging in surface-level banter about the weather's cooperation for the big day, all while Sarah probed indirectly about the RSVP anomalies, her suspicion flickering like a shadow across her features as she suggested that only someone intimately familiar with the system could have engineered such a disruption. The brunch stretched onward with an undercurrent of tension that flavored every exchange, guests navigating the awkwardness with polite deflections until the group migrated to the garden for dessert, where the crisp air carried hints of impending frost and the conversation turned toward nostalgic family anecdotes that skirted the edges of our divisions, allowing me to drop a veiled reference to how blood ties endure beyond invitations or oversights, a statement that hung in the air and elicited a subtle shift in Sarah's posture. Seizing a momentary lapse when the others dispersed to admire Mom's perennial beds, I wandered into the house under the pretense of fetching more napkins, my footsteps leading me to the cluttered office where drawers overflowed with mementos from our past, and there, tucked amid faded photographs and tax documents, I glimpsed an aged envelope bearing Sarah's youthful script. Addressed to Dad, its contents partially visible through a tear that revealed phrases alluding to your error with her and implications of favors granted to silence ripples from an indiscretion long concealed. Heart pounding with the weight of this inadvertent discovery, I committed the fragment to memory before retreating, but as I emerged into the sunlight, Sarah intercepted me near the patio doors, her voice dropping to a heated murmur that accused me outright of orchestrating the RSVP fiasco and warned that any further meddling would unearth skeletons best left buried, her intensity revealing a vulnerability that cracked the facade of her bridal bliss and left me grappling with the dawning realization that our rift might entwine with betrayals far more profound than surface rivalries. Sarah's heated confrontation in the garden that afternoon reverberated through the remaining hours of the brunch, like an undercurrent pulling at the edges of every forced smile and casual exchange. Her warning about unearthing buried skeletons resonating with the partial glimpse I'd caught of that old envelope in Mom's office, a discovery that propelled me back to Chicago with a mind racing through fragmented memories of our family's fractured dynamics long before Dad's abrupt departure from our lives via that unforeseen heart attack a full decade earlier. Settling into the familiar rhythm of my apartment overlooking the bustling streets, I found solace in the glow of my computer screen as I revisited digital archives of childhood photos stored in forgotten cloud folders, each image stirring recollections of simpler times when Sarah and I shared secrets under the covers during sleepovers, our bond untainted by the subtle shifts that began around her 12th birthday, a period marked by Dad's increasingly erratic work schedule and Mom's quiet withdrawals into afternoons spent reorganizing the kitchen cabinets with a fervor that masked deeper anxieties. Those years unfolded in my mind's eye as a tapestry of overlooked signs, Dad's cologne lingering on collars a touch too long after office hours, Sarah's sudden elevation to the role of confidant in family decisions that once included me equally, and Mom's preferential treatment manifesting in extra dance lessons for Sarah while I scraped together funds for art supplies from odd jobs at the local library, patterns that now, in hindsight, hinted at the error alluded to in the letter's torn edge, suggesting an indiscretion on Dad's part with someone outside our circle that rippled outward to redefine loyalties and leave me, the older sister by 3 years, positioned as the unwitting guardian of silences to preserve the household's fragile equilibrium. The dilemma intensified during a late-night call from Mark, who mentioned in passing that Sarah had vented to him about safeguarding the wedding from echoes of old pains, a phrase that twisted the knife of exclusion by implying my presence might summon ghosts I had helped suppress during our teenage years, compelling me to weigh the cost of continued retaliation against the risk of perpetuating a cycle where my independence was branded as disruption rather than the self-preservation it truly represented. As the wedding loomed just 2 weeks away, the internal tug-of-war culminated in a decision that teetered on the brink of recklessness, where I composed an anonymous submission to a prominent lifestyle blog known for dissecting high society events, detailing the venue's prized floral imports from European greenhouses that Sarah had boasted about in a now-deleted post, framing the information as an exclusive peek behind the curtain of their $750,000 spectacle to generate curiosity without direct harm, the act infused with a wry internal humor at the thought of turning their quest for perfection into fodder for public fascination, even as a voice in my head chided the pettiness of it all, acknowledging that such maneuvers might alienate the few allies I had left in the family fold. The piece published the very next morning, its polished prose speculating on the lavish details and the couple's ascent into elite circles, igniting a cascade of shares across social platforms that elevated the wedding's profile while sowing seeds of intrigue about the authenticity of such opulence in a family with roots in middle-class Ohio, a development that sent ripples through our group chat as Mom disseminated the article with urgent queries about the source, her messages laced with paranoia over potential breaches in their privacy protocols. The family's response escalated when Sarah phoned me directly that evening, her voice a volatile mix of indignation and underlying fear as she laid the blame at my doorstep, asserting that no outsider could possess such intimate knowledge and that my history of stirring unrest made me the prime suspect in this latest bid to undermine her joy. To which I countered with feigned innocence and a dash of levity by quipping that if I were the perpetrator, I'd have prioritized exposing the groom's questionable taste in ties over mere flowers. Yet her retort sliced through the banter like a revelation long withheld, blurting out references to Dad's affair that I had witnessed as a wide-eyed teenager during one fateful summer evening when voices rose from the garage and shadows moved in ways that shattered my innocence. A confession that positioned me not as the chaotic element, but as the one who had chosen silence to shield Sarah from the fallout, thereby entangling my exclusion with a complicity Mom had exploited to favor her younger daughter ever since. Reeling from the exchange, I ended the call and delved deeper into personal records, unearthing an archived email from Dad dated years prior that alluded to a special provision for Sarah's future, resembling a trust fund designed to quiet inquiries into his lapse with a colleague whose name now evoked vague familiarity. A clue that intensified the moral ambiguity of my actions and left me staring at the ceiling into the small hours, pondering whether my anonymous leak had merely amplified the wedding's allure or inadvertently cracked open doors to truths that could redefine us all. The swelling media attention provided a temporary distraction, with local outlets picking up the thread and speculating on the event's insider drama, but as notifications piled up, Sarah's parting text arrived like a thunderclap, declaring that should I dare attend the ceremony, she would ensure the assembled guests learned every detail of what I had allowed to transpire back then, a threat that suspended me in a web of uncertainty, torn between retreat and the compulsion to confront the shadows head-on before they consumed the fragile remnants of our sibling tie. Sarah's ominous text from the previous night cast a long shadow over the final preparations for her wedding, its words replaying in my thoughts like a looped recording during the sleepless hours before dawn as I weighed the implications of her threat to unveil the details of Dad's affair that I had witnessed and subsequently buried deep within the compartments of family loyalty. A silence that had preserved our fragile unity at the expense of my own emotional freedom and now positioned me as the potential architect of scandal should I venture into the lion's den of the Connecticut estate. Despite the internal storm, the pull toward resolution proved irresistible, drawing me to book a modest hotel room mere miles from the venue under the guise of a spontaneous business trip that masked my true intent to infiltrate the event uninvited. A choice that even I recognized as bordering on the self-destructive yet infused with the defiant spark of someone determined to reclaim agency from years of being cast as the peripheral figure in our family's narrative. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the brewing turmoil inside me, and after slipping into an emerald gown that blended sophistication with understated rebellion, its cut flattering without demanding the spotlight, I navigated the winding roads to the estate, flashing a pilfered invite from a loosely connected relative at the valet station to gain entry amid the procession of luxury vehicles depositing guests in tailored attire, the air alive with the fragrance of exotic lilies imported for the occasion and the distant strains of a string ensemble warming up for the vows. Blending into the throng during the cocktail reception, I exchanged superficial pleasantries with aunts and uncles who expressed mild surprise at my attendance. Their queries about the oversight and invitations met with my evasive smiles that deflected deeper probes while I observed the opulent ballroom. Transformed into a vision of excess, complete with cascading tulle draperies, a multi-tiered cake that symbolized the $750,000 investment in this fleeting perfection, and Tom circulating with an air of unassailable contentment that contrasted sharply with the undercurrents of tension I sensed rippling through Sarah's poised facade. Mom's detection of my presence came swiftly as the pre-ceremony mingling peaked, her approach marked by a rigid smile that barely concealed the fury simmering beneath as she guided me toward a secluded alcove off the main hall, her whispers laced with accusations of disregarding her explicit warnings and risking the entire day's harmony through my unpredictable tendencies. A lecture that echoed the very dynamics she had enforced since our youth by prioritizing Sarah's unmarred image over the complexities of equitable sibling bonds. The exchange escalated when Sarah, radiant in her gown yet shadowed by apprehension, intervened with a firm grasp on my elbow, drawing me aside amid the murmur of arriving guests to reiterate her ultimatum in hushed tones that carried the weight of unresolved grievances, insisting that my intrusion threatened not just the festivities, but the carefully maintained veil over Dad's indiscretion with his colleague. An event I had stumbled upon as a teenager during a late-night return from a friend's house and chosen to ignore in favor of shielding my younger sister from the devastation that followed Mom's eventual discovery. The confrontation hung suspended in that charged moment, the quartet's melody swelling in the background like an ironic soundtrack to our discord, until an opportunity arose during the informal toast segment when the MC invited spontaneous well wishes from the floor, prompting me to seize the microphone with a steady hand and deliver a speech that wove humor into subtle revelations, raising my glass to celebrate Sarah's pursuit of an idyllic union while gently underscoring the hypocrisies of building dreams on foundations riddled with unacknowledged imperfections. Phrases like, "May your fairy tale endure the real world's occasional storms," landing with a mix of appreciative chuckles and uneasy glances that caused Sarah's expression to fracture momentarily without fully shattering the event's veneer. The room's reaction blended awkward applause with speculative whispers, Tom offering a supportive pat on my back that diffused some tension while Mom's stare promised repercussions in the days to come. And as the official ceremony commenced with Sarah proceeding down the aisle under a canopy of blooms, I lingered on the fringes until the first dance claimed the spotlight, then extricated myself quietly into the encroaching dusk, the patter of impending rain on the windshield amplifying the catharsis of my verbal jab that had asserted my voice without descending into outright demolition. Driving away from the estate, my phone vibrated with a voicemail from Sarah left in the ceremony's interlude, her tone stripped of bridal artifice and laced with raw admission as she detailed how Mom's favoritism had originated from the guilt of concealing Dad's lapse, channeling resources into a discreet trust for Sarah to ensure perpetual silence, while relegating me to the role of inconvenient witness whose candor might unravel the construct. A partial truth that flooded me with a bittersweet validation, yet deepened the chasm of betrayal. Pulling over on a rain-slicked shoulder as the storm broke fully, I absorbed the confession's layers, the water streaking the windows like unshed tears, and in a surge of reclaimed determination, I dialed Alex. My steadfast fiancé, whose patience through this saga had been unwavering, proposing an impulsive elopement to Paris that would counter their extravagance with intimate authenticity. Yet as he agreed enthusiastically over the line, a nagging dilemma surfaced unbidden. What if this flight toward my own happiness merely perpetuated the pattern of evasion rather than confronting the fractures head-on, leaving the family's wounds to fester in ambiguity while I chased a horizon that might ultimately circle back to the same unresolved shadows? The impulsive decision to elope with Alex crystallized in the midst of that roadside downpour following Sarah's wedding, where the relentless drumming of rain on the car roof underscored the urgency of breaking free from the suffocating web of family expectations that had ensnared me for decades, prompting us to book the earliest available flight to Paris just 2 days later as a deliberate counterpoint to the ostentatious Connecticut affair that had marginalized my role in our shared narrative. Arriving in the City of Light under a veil of jet lag and tentative excitement, we selected a quaint chapel along the Seine for our ceremony, its weathered stones and stained glass windows offering a sanctuary far removed from the crystal-laden ballrooms of Sarah's event, where Alex and I exchanged vows in the soft glow of morning sun filtering through the arches. My promises to him laced with the quiet resolve to forge a partnership unburdened by the favoritism and silences that had defined my interactions with Mom and Sarah since Dad's indiscretion came to light in fragmented whispers during my teenage years. The officiant's pronouncement of our union sealed the moment with a profound simplicity that contrasted sharply with the $750,000 spectacle back home, and as we stepped out into the crisp Parisian air hand in hand, we meandered through cobblestone alleys toward iconic landmarks, capturing candid photographs at the Eiffel Tower's intricate ironwork bathed in the golden hues of dusk, Alex's laughter ringing out when I insisted on donning a whimsical beret from a street vendor to commemorate the whimsy of our escape, the images infused with an authenticity that felt like the truest form of reclamation after years of being typecast as the disruptive force in a family that prized appearances over emotional honesty. In the initial days of our honeymoon, I hesitated to share any of it online, content with the private joy that bloomed amid café strolls and whispered plans for a future rooted in mutual support rather than inherited grudges. Yet on a whim one evening, as we lounged in our modest hotel overlooking the river, I uploaded a single photo to my seldom-used social profile, the caption a subtle nod to Mom's earlier dismissal with the words, "Our version of chaos," perfectly embraced, a phrase that carried the lighthearted sting of irony without overt aggression, intending it merely as a personal milestone marker for the handful of friends who followed my sporadic updates. The post's virality unfolded unexpectedly over the following week, starting with shares from well-wishers who connected the dots to Sarah's widely publicized nuptials through mutual networks, escalating into a media frenzy as lifestyle blogs and entertainment outlets latched onto the narrative of the snubbed sisters' stunning Paris revenge, with headlines dissecting how my understated elopement had eclipsed the grandeur of her event across news feeds. From coast to coast, the juxtaposition highlighting the cultural obsession with weddings as status symbols in American society, where even middle-class families like ours aspired to fairy tale validations amid economic realities that often fell short. Returning to Chicago a week later, the buzz had transformed into a full-blown phenomenon. Inquiries flooding my inbox from journalists eager to unpack the family drama, while distant relatives reached out with a mix of congratulations and thinly veiled curiosity about the exclusions that had sparked it all. A development that delivered the satisfying wit of turning their oversight into my spotlight without the messiness of direct confrontation, yet the triumph carried an undercurrent of hollowness as Mom's call pierced the celebratory haze, her congratulations delivered in a tone threaded with resentment that accused my timing of dredging up old wounds unnecessarily. Particularly the whispers now circulating about Dad's affair thanks to the toast I had delivered at the reception that had planted seeds of speculation among the guests. Sarah's subsequent email arrived like a delayed aftershock. Its contents a reluctant unburdening where she acknowledged the origins of Mom's favoritism in the form of a covert trust fund Dad had established for her to buy perpetual discretion following his one-time lapse with a work colleague. A financial safeguard that I had vaguely intuited through overheard arguments, but never pursued, revealing how my perceived chaos stemmed less from my personality than from Mom's strategy to protect Sarah. As the innocent bystander, while I bore the brunt of the unspoken complicity for having glimpsed the truth first. The twists deepened in those revelations when Alex confessed over dinner that he had anonymously boosted my photo to a prominent wedding influencer platform. His intervention a quiet act of solidarity born from frustration at how the exclusion had strained our relationship in the preceding months, a disclosure that both warmed and unsettled me by underscoring the collaborative nature of my revenge in ways I hadn't anticipated. Further complicating the picture, Mark disclosed during a surprise visit that he had safeguarded the complete contents of Sarah's old letter for years, choosing neutrality over intervention in a bid to avoid escalating the divides that Dad's actions had sown. His admission prompting a reevaluation of loyalties I had long assumed were steadfast and leaving me to ponder the extent to which silence had perpetuated our fractures across generations. As the media storm crusted with invitations to share my side on morning talk shows that I politely declined, preferring the ambiguity of letting the story simmer without full exposition. The family's tentative overtures emerged in the form of holiday cards from Sarah bearing neutral well wishes and Mom's proposal for a reconciliation brunch that dangled the promise of mending without guaranteeing transparency. Yet the lingering questions refused to dissipate. Had my Paris triumph truly exposed the illusions of their fairy tale and fostered growth, or merely illuminated the irreparable rifts widened by buried secrets? With Dad's ghost continuing to influence dynamics from afar? In the quiet aftermath, as Alex and I settled into our newlywed routine blending his architectural blueprints with my design sketches, the uncertainty persisted like a half-finished canvas, inviting reflection on whether forgiveness could bridge such divides or if the chaos I embodied served as a necessary disruption to challenge the status quo, ultimately leaving the narrative open to interpretation as life moved forward in its unpredictable cadence.